On to our next topic, which is on the passion for innovation and the role of startups in the tech sector's ecosystem. So your contributions in establishing and advancing impactful entrepreneurship education programs have been invaluable. Could you share some insights on the developments of the One North Innovation District in Singapore and the pivotal role of Block 71 in cultivating the thriving startup ecosystem?
Okay, first of all, I want to sort of emphasize that entrepreneurship is not just about starting business. It's not just about startup. Because I believe that entrepreneurship is really about, a mindset that, you are willing to take some risk to do something, and also about a particular approach of start small, experimenting, try. If it doesn't work, try something else, being very agile, and then have a proof of concept, make sure it works before you scale, right? And I believe that entrepreneurial mindset is needed throughout the society, throughout the economy. In fact, I think one of the problems with many countries, including I would say Singapore, is that many of the large corporations, they don't have enough of employees who are entrepreneurial minded, or they don't have policy that encourage their employees to be entrepreneurial minded. In fact, you look at, I may be criticized for this, but I've always been critical that some of our largest government-linked corporations, our Singapore government investment in them, they are actually not very innovative. You look at the amount they spend on R&D, you look at the extent to which they innovate new products, they are not. So the society need not just entrepreneurs who are willing to come out and start company, but also who are willing, within large organizations, to become willing to take some risks and to push new things. And sometimes they have to do it even if the company policy does not encourage them, because you do need that. So we call it intrapreneurship, right? You want to encourage that mindset more. And then even among those who are involved in, when we talk about the tech startup ecosystem, it's not just the entrepreneur, but also there are a whole range of people who are sort of player and actor in the ecosystem. So like, for example, if let's say someone who graduated from university, instead of taking a job in the civil servant or work for a big company like Samsung, he or she chose to work for a young startup. He or she is not an entrepreneur, but he's taking some risks, he's giving up a big potential career at a big company and choosing. That kind of risk taking is also reflecting of the entrepreneur mindset. And to be honest, if you want to have a lot of young startup, the young startup must be able to attract people to work for them. If everybody don't want to work for them, everybody want to work for Samsung, they also die, right? So you also need to encourage people who are willing to take that. So that's why when I introduced the NUS overseas colleges to change and all that, I always want to make sure that we don't measure the success of the program in terms of how many of them went on to start company. I want to see, and not immediately after graduation. I want to look at after 5-10 years, what do they do? Some of them actually start company, but some of them went to work for a young startup, and some of them went to work for a big company, but after a few years accumulated enough experience, then come and start company. Some of them went to join venture capital firm. Some of them went to become in the incubator and so on. All of these are part of the ecosystem. And all of them playing an important role. And then some of them went to work for a big company, but they play more innovative role. They are involved in new business development. They are the one who get employed to go, okay, you go and start a new venture in Myanmar or something. So I think the ecosystem need lots of these people, not just only the entrepreneur. And in fact, if for many of you who are interested in entrepreneurship, you need not think that, I must become an entrepreneur on graduation. It's okay, go and work in large company, go and work in government agency or whatever, but you have your mindset at some point you may want to come out, or you also want to be innovative within big organizations. In fact, part of the challenge is that many civil servants, they are too conservative, right? They're not willing to take risks and behave like entrepreneurs. So one of the articles I sent is about it, because there was a question about One North, right? How One North will develop. Now you listen to the official government version, that of course is a government project, government see the importance of a science park and develop it. But as my article show, the One North would not have happened if not for one individual, which is Philip Yeo, right? He was the chairman of UDB, seems very high up. But he feels that Singapore might really develop the life sciences, we must develop these. And he went and do these things without getting the formal approval first. And in my article shows that in many cases he actually go against he hasn't got the approval yet, you know. Like even some of you may know that he started with A-Star, right? That then he wanted a program to send students to do PhD in life sciences. So he actually did not got approval from the government yet to actually give out scholarship, because that time A-Star has no budget for PhD scholarship. But he somehow got budget from somewhere else, reallocated, and give it out first, you know. And he's willing to do this because he's passionate, and he's trying to be an entrepreneur within a large organization. He knows that if you wait for permission, it will take too long, you know, and then they will not allow him to move as fast. So sometimes you need this entrepreneurial drive within the government also, because if not, everybody just wait for instruction from the top, you also have a problem, right? So, and the same thing with big companies. So I believe that the ecosystem, we need to have both startup as well as many other players to work together. We even need government policies that are willing to be taking some risk, you know. So like for example, how the Block 71, since you mentioned, right, what was started. So the Block 71 was just one of 7 blocks in the old industrial estate. The government was going to tear them all down and build high-rise offices. So we say, you know, can you give us the block that is the last one that you're going to dismantle? And we try to, with minimal renovation, we try and see whether it turn into a low-cost startup community. Because for startup, we don't want them to have posh offices. And we're going to be, you know, we give them low cost, we minimal investment, and we did it. And then when it became popular, but then the civil servants say, we still have to demolish it. So they actually send out notice to ask all this startup to vacate, because we're going to demolish it. So luckily, the startup entrepreneurs themselves in the incubator, they started a campaign of protest, you know. And then we also go and talk to the government. That time there was a minister in charge of entrepreneurship. And luckily he saw that actually, yeah, you know, why just follow the orders because there was a plan and change. So he's willing to say, okay, let's not demolish it. He convinced the other government agency to not proceed with the demolition. So a lot of time you see it happen, key individuals actually play a role in getting things done. It's not like everything, in hindsight you say, oh, one lot was all well planned from the, it wasn't, you know. And the Block 71 wasn't planned at all, right? It because some individual push it, and then other people willing to take risks and support it. So the ecosystem to be vibrant, you need such entrepreneur-minded people on both sides. And you talk about startup working with big company. Startup always want to work with big company. The problem with big company doesn't want to work with startup. And secondly, big company, when they work with startup, they sometimes take their idea and do it themselves, right? So that's why you also need the big startup, the big company to also have entrepreneur-minded people willing to take risks. So you need both to you need both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs to make the ecosystem vibrant.
Alright, thank you so much. That was really quite insightful about how the ecosystem in Singapore can be developed in the future to really innovate, and I guess the idea of individual ideas for progress and innovation to really have a very vibrant system for future developments. So on to the next question. So in your perspective, what role do startups and small businesses play in the tech sector's ecosystem?
Well, I mean, you look at throughout the world, one company become too big, even if they already started a startup, they get more bureaucratic. They become much more conservative. And in fact, therefore, many of the more entrepreneur-minded employees, right, get frustrated. because they want to get things done and the big company take too long, and so they leave and start businesses. This to me is actually a very healthy circulation. You know, these people work in a big company, they gain the experience, they gain the network connection, then they leave and come out. But for that to happen, you need to have venture capital and risk capital, angel financing, who will invest in these, you know, people. So actually, a lot of the successful startups are not founded by fresh graduate. I mean, people think of Mark Zuckerberg, oh, okay, you know, it's that. You know. But the reality is that most of the very successful, especially deep technical companies, are started by people who started working in the bigger company, working in Hewlett Packard, working in Apple, working in Google, and then they leave and start their businesses. And this circulation of talent is important, and venture capital is an important form to actually help to fund these people who come out and start businesses. So you need a very strong community of angel investors and venture capital funds to actually invest in these talented these people, because just have entrepreneurial people is not enough, especially for technology, because they take years sometimes to actually develop a technology to a form that is readily usable, right? So you need this longer term patient capital. Yeah. So I mean, for example, I'm an advisor and limited partner of one venture capital fund called iGroup. We actually invest globally, not just in Singapore, in startup, including, you know, startup come out of Berkeley and Stanford and New York and so on. So we have to, you have to have such venture capital funding to support them. And the basic business model of a venture capital fund is that of a portfolio. In other words, you invest in 10 startups, 5 or 6 will fail. And then 1 or 2 may give you back maybe 1 time, 2 times, 3 times return. But you hope that the 1 or 2 of them will be a home run. They give you 10 times, 20 times, 50 times your return. And so you just need 1 or 2 home runs, and the overall portfolio will give you a good return, right? So you need to have this portfolio approach. You cannot just invest in one and hope that it will be successful. So that's why this venture capital is an important point. And you need to have also sufficient diversification into, like, you know, we invest not just, we invest in the West Coast, East Coast of US, we invest in, you know, Southeast Asia, we invest in Singapore, so we diversify. So you need to also groom and develop these venture capital as a key part of the ecosystem. Now, some big companies, they actually recognize that it's very difficult because of the conservative culture to actually support them. So they actually set up what they call corporate venture capital fund, which is managed separately from the main corporation, and whose job is to find interesting startups to invest in. So they behave like a venture capitalist. But this is partly also because the parent company also, they realize that it's very difficult for a big company to move fast. Yeah. So one of the key advantages of startup is that it's able to move much faster than a big company. Big company have a lot more money and resources, but they take too long to make decisions. So that's why you need to have a balance of both. And I believe that one of the things that Singapore had done well is that we attracted, we provided incentive to attract and, you know, build a reasonably good venture capital industry in Singapore that actually invests in the region. You know. We have also trained up sufficient local Singaporeans to become venture capitalists. So I think we need to continue to do that, and we need to continue to encourage them not to just look at investing in Singapore, because you have to learn how to invest in the world. Yeah. So some overseas experience, exposure is important.
Alright, thank you so much. So it was quite enlightening, like how you were talking about the investments required by venture capitals to develop, like, I guess, some firms which will eventually, some startups which will eventually grow into very kind of big players in this entire ecosystem. However, like I think perhaps you could go more into the actual relation between, let's say, startups and companies, regarding how, let's say, startups contribute to innovation and how they also benefit from, I guess, established players in the industry, for example, like these big companies. And also, like, I guess, how, like, are there any specific examples regarding, I guess, startups, like, making significant impacts on big, like, I guess, companies and businesses, or, like, I guess, businesses that are able to, like, I guess, build up these small startups into very significant players?
Well, as I mentioned, many of the big company, they are moving too slowly in innovation. So sometimes they actually wait and see what the startup does, or they may, give them a bit of funding to see how they go. And sometimes they partner with them, and if they're successful, then later they may acquire them, or they may, leverage them to grow. But usually, the startup need to find some other more willing customer than the big company, because to be able to sell to a very big company, they are very too stringent. So usually a startup find it very difficult to actually immediately sell to a big company. So they may need to find what we call a beachhead market, where the requirement is not so stringent, and get some customer validation first before you sell it. Because the usual thing, big company will, the first thing they ask of a startup is that, who else has bought from you? If no other big company has bought from them, they don't want to be the guinea pig, right? You take a bank, you go to one of the 4 local banks, for some innovation. The first thing they ask is, which of the other bank has bought your solution? If not, they would rather not. They rather buy from the IBM of the world, because, see, the key point is that if you bought some software from IBM and it failed to work, you wouldn't lose your job, right? Because it's IBM, right? But you bought a software from a new young startup and it doesn't work, then, then he may be chopped, right? So there's conservatism there. Usually that you need to have it validated through some beachhead market before the big company will come in. So I give you an example, right? This Berkeley, since you're from Berkeley, right? This iGlobe, this venture cap fund, we recently, 2 years ago, we invested in an interesting startup by 2 PhD students from Berkeley, right? So they have the idea of using synthetic biology, gene editing, right, technology. Because one of the key areas we focus on is synthetic biology. This is another thing about venture capital, is that you need to have clear focus area. We say that we want to develop a lot of deep knowledge about this, so that when we invest in it, we understand enough of the technology, and also we have enough connection. So we don't randomly invest in any startup, right? So we have identified synthetic biology as one of the key innovations in the future. But we see they had many applications. So these 2 PhD students, what they did is that because they address a problem of chemical pollution associated with the dye of clothing. You wear your blue jeans, the blue dye, right, came from chemical. And this chemical actually is a bit toxic, right, to the environment. So they have the idea that why not we edit the gene of some bacteria, such that these bacteria will produce the dye, the color. So it's biologically produced, and these are also therefore not toxic, right? So the PhD research show in the lab that you could actually produce a certain color, right? But they haven't been able to produce exactly the blue jean dye color yet. So they need a bit more development, right? So the venture capital fund invests in them for them to do their trial, and then once the trial is done, then to build a pilot plant, right, to produce a number of quantity. Now up to that point, none of the big blue jean company, or they want to they want to see first, right? So this is where venture capital come in. We, together with other investors, we invested in them for them to produce that pilot plant and to produce some sample of dye to show that it seems to work. And only after that we have got to a point where one of the blue jean company had announced that they're willing to work with them to do a trial test on this, and if it's successful, then they will deploy it to others. So this is an example where, right, you know that in order to work with these big companies, you need to do a lot more before they are willing to sign on. And so this is where the venture capital comes in. And we kind of take the risk to say that, to bridge this gap, the so-called value of that, right? Because they may fail, I mean, it may work in the lab, but when you scale up, it may be too expensive or whatever, right? And then there are all the regulatory approval you needed, because you are editing the gene or bacteria. You can make sure that it doesn't produce anything, right, dangerous or whatever, right? So there's some regulation. And then when you build your pilot plant, right, you may have to make sure that the bacteria does not get into the public, So I think this is just one example to illustrate that the barrier is that mainstream usually want to wait to see the technology more validated before they're willing to sign on.
Thank you. I found it very interesting that you brought up the decision-making process of venture capitalists before they actually invest in these smaller startups. And while these smaller startups do expand or progress much faster than these bigger companies, it also means that it entails a bigger risk when it comes to investing in them.
Go Pascal! Go Pascal!